You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. Been a great deal of talk recently about mental health issues and stress, particularly on the farm. And with COVID-19, many of our stress levels have gone up significantly as we've been told we have to stay home and we can't go out, and all of our recreational outlets seem to have been shut down. Hopefully at some point shortly we'll be back to those again. But that has contributed quite significantly to a lot of stress that we see on the farm. There's one group out there that has looked at this from a different perspective here, though. They're looking at the link between farm business management practices and mental health, and that is Farm Management Canada. We're talking to Heather Watson today. Heather is the Executive Director of Farm Management Canada, and we're going to talk today a little bit about stress on the farm and maybe some ways that we can alleviate that. Heather, welcome to the Back 40.
Thanks so much, Mike. Really happy to be here and talking about this very important topic.
So for those of our listeners who don't know anything about Heather Watson, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'll try and be quick about it. I don't know why, but I've always had an interest in agriculture. We grew up living on a farm, but we didn't farm. We just happened to be able to afford a farmhouse that a farmer agreed to rent out to us. So I think that was the start of it. And growing up in a farm town as well. I'm from Strathroy, Ontario. And then I worked in the local farm supply store. So it was kind of all farming all the time by kind of not design, but by default. And then from there, I actually went to the University of Guelph for the ambience, and I wanted to still be close to agriculture. I ended up doing my degree in English literature and then on to my master's in the same thing. But when I returned from the UK after my master's, Kemptville College up here near Ottawa was looking for someone to basically translate farm advisor speak into farmer speak for some learning courses and learning opportunities and a bit of a resource center with a focus on business management. So that was kind of my first foray into farm business management. And then a few years later, I got hooked up with Farm Management Canada, came into that organization, and I've been with them since 2009. And here we are today.
So what exactly does Farm Management Canada do?
It's interesting because you can kind of break the question apart a few ways. I guess I would say in terms of our mandate, we want to increase the awareness, the appreciation, which I'll emphasize that, and most of all, the adoption of business management practices on the farm. So we do that by developing and delivering content to producers and what we call influencers, so advisors and other industry service providers, to try and bring that business management lens into farming. We develop and deliver our own stuff, but we also, which I think is important, connect producers and those influencers to other learning opportunities. So partnership is a big name of the game, and trying to kind of connect the industry so that we can kind of always be there to put that farm business management lens on whatever topics being discussed, if it's sustainability or if it's policy development or if it's risk management programming. We want to make sure that we're coming at it from a let's build our capacity to do this and do it well. And then we also have gotten into research more so recently than in the past, but a lot of research into the adoption of practices, the drivers, the barriers, as you mentioned, our recent study into mental health. Right now, we're finishing up a study on the opportunities for Indigenous producers in farm business management. But I guess on the other side of things, we kind of consider ourselves, we're a national organization, we're nonprofit, we're non-government, but we really see ourselves as kind of extension, knowledge translation and transfer, and kind of a public service body. Our goal is to influence the adoption of business management practices. So we do that in a lot of different ways. Technically speaking, we do rely on the government for a substantial portion of funds. We also rely on industry for trying to support half the things we do. So it puts us in an interesting position where we're meeting the obligations from a government and industry perspective, and all the while recognizing the importance of being able to meet the farmer where they are from the grassroots to solve the issues and seize the opportunities that are in the frame of the farmer here and now.
So, if you're focused on farm business practices and we're talking about mental health, what's the connection there? Because on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's a huge connection between the two, but obviously you found something there.
Yeah, so when you say the words farm business management, mental health, you think, okay, like I don't really get it. Let's just put words together and see if they want to party. But where it came from was I was attending a young farmers conference a number of years ago now. And there was a presenter called Doc Com. He's actually from Toronto and he's kind of the stress doctor. And he was talking about when you're under significant amounts of stress and for a long time, it starts to affect the way that you think, your capacity to think, the way that you control your emotions, your behavior, and things like that. And so he was talking about when you're under stress, it's really difficult to make decisions. It's difficult to sleep at night, or maybe you're getting too much sleep. It's difficult to regulate your emotions, and it's difficult to really prioritize and know what you should be doing and when. And working with other people becomes really challenging when you're under great deals of stress. So I was kind of sitting there with my farm business management hat on and thinking, okay, well, difficulty controlling emotions and interacting with people, and a feeling of wanting to avoid social interaction, trouble with sleeping, trouble with eating, trouble getting along with folks. I thought that could probably have pretty significant implications for managing a farm business, because it's really all about the people. And of course, if you have animals, it's all about the animals too, animal health and welfare, and being there in that capacity. So I started to think, I wonder if some of the practices we do in farm business management, such as trying to plan ahead, trying to plan within your capacity, trying to not take on more than you should be taking on, and delegating tasks and things like that, as well as, knowing your financial position, knowing your opportunities and things, whether that would be helpful to combat some of the, I guess, coping mechanisms or results of being highly stressed. But then on the other side, I was thinking, well, we've been at this for a long time. This organization has been around since the early 90s, and it's always been a struggle to increase the adoption of business management practices on the farm. I thought, are we contributing to mental health issues, to stress, by saying, okay, that's great, farmer, that you're successful in your capacity and whatnot, but you don't have a business plan. You should really have a business plan. I thought, are we contributing to the problem? So that's kind of where we wanted to look into it further. And we wanted to know, independent of the outcome, whether it was good or bad, whether we were doing a good job or a bad job, what is the connection? Is there a connection? And so that's why we called it exploring the connection, because we didn't really know what that would be. But I'm happy to say we did find a connection.
And what is that connection?
It's like, da, da, da. And the interesting thing is, so first we looked at a course, mental health in the industry, and we launched off of the work of the standing committee and off of the work of University of Guelph and other groups like that. And we asked, okay, so with our business management lens, we said, okay, let's look at stress in the Canadian farming population. So we found through our results, very similar to what was found in others, that about 3/4 of farmers are reporting moderate to high stress. But then we were asking about, okay, well, what is causing the stress specifically with, of course, our business management lens on? And so the three main causes of stress were unpredictably the ag sector was at 71%, so pretty significant, followed by workload pressures, and then followed by financial pressures. And there was a whole lot of other stressors that we had listed, and all of them were acknowledged as, yes, this is a stressor, but those were kind of the three that came out of the study. So then we asked about their business management practices, and we said, okay, well, what practices do you have in place and don't have in place, and why? And so for those that had business planning, for example, in place, 88% of those said it's contributed to my peace of mind and helps me sleep at night. It takes away some of that uncertainty or unpredictability. It also helps get other members of the farm team on the same page and kind of pulling in the same direction. And it's also a reference point for us to make decisions, choose our priorities and run with it, and really have that reference point for stress runs high and decision making becomes clouded, you have a resource where when everything was pretty darn good and you were in a good place to vision and plan, you knew what you wanted. So let's go back and reference that now that you're in a bit of a stressful situation. So they found that it brought peace of mind. And then we also found that those that had a business plan, it seemed to kind of trigger other business management practices, such as having up to date financial records, doing financial planning and budgeting, also linked to having some HR mechanisms in place, such as policies, job descriptions, and things like that. And then also things like transition plans and leading into those kind of more longer term plans and conversations around that. So that was the good news. Of course, we said, oh, cool, there's a connection and there's a positive connection. So we can rely on business management practices to help support positive mental health. And then it was interesting because we asked those that said, I don't have a business plan, I don't use advisors, I don't seek learning opportunities, etc. So testing the kind of typical best management practices against why or why not. And so on the why nots, it was really interesting because the number one response was I'm succeeding without it. And so we had this weird predicament where we said, okay, so 75% of you are moderately to highly stressed, and most of it's caused by unpredictability of the ag sector and workload pressures. But you're not going to do business practices because you're succeeding without it. So it was really interesting because we had all the responses from those saying, this is why we do these practices. From there, we can kind of start to unpack this. What does success look like? And that's what we've been trying to work on is say, how can we redefine success? I mean, not knowing what the respondents really meant by success. It was tick a box on why you're not doing these things. And that was one of the responses. Okay, but what does success mean to you? Because to the people who have a business plan, it means greater profitability, reduced risk, greater family farm team harmony, greater confidence in making decisions, greater ability to prioritize, and less stress and anxiety. So if that's the measure for success, then how does that compare to what's happening on these farms that don't have a business plan? So in a lot of the other research that we've done, the dollars and cents study, for example, covered kind of 5 years of adoption and kind of what is the increase or decrease in adoption of practices. And we found that over the last 5 years, the adoption of business practices has actually gone down and gone down significantly. Not a single one has increased. But then we kind of compare that to how the industry's gone and also compare that to our natural inclination. We typically look at doing things differently when we're in a crisis, when things have changed and we need to change with it. So when we look at what's been happening, and of course, these studies were done just before COVID, business has been relatively good. When you compare the last 20 years to the 1980s, it's been a long time since we saw the interest rates of the 80s, the commodity prices of the 80s, and a lot of farmers being left high and dry. So when that experience is so far from you and the farmers say we're succeeding without it, yeah, I mean, business has been relatively good. And so it's a little bit more difficult to make the argument we're making, which is, but it could be so much better. And also, are you sure it's good? Are you sure your measures of success are what they should be? And are these the measures for you? And are they the same for your farm team or farm family? Because oftentimes, if you look at, well, we're in the black, so everything's all good. Maybe your marriage is falling apart, or your kids have moved on because there hasn't been progress on transition planning and conversations around that. So, what I'm saying is, from all of this mental health research that we did, we're kind of really focusing on the how do we define success and unpack that a little bit so that we can entertain those conversations of, are you sure you're succeeding in everywhere that's important for both you and everyone that you're working with?
My question on that is, if you're so successful, why are stress levels so high? And you talk about that definition of success. For some people, that's simply able to put a crop in next year. And so I'm successful. I'm able to provide a living for my family. I can put a crop in next year. They're not necessarily doing as well as they could. And you talked a little bit about the transition to the next generation and how other people feel in that farming entity there. So let's talk a little bit about that. how do, in many cases, we're talking about the male or the husband being the farmer, if you like. So how do farm women feel, and how does the next generation feel about this? Is there a difference there?
Actually, that's a really good question and a really important question, because when we talk about the overall results of our research, the three stressors were the unpredictability, da 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 da. When we look at isolating females responding and young people responding, it's different. All of a sudden, we see for the females, it's family and farm team harmony and transition planning are significant sources of stress. And kind of anecdotally, through the focus groups and through the interviews, it was the feeling that the women feel responsible for keeping everyone happy, keeping everyone together, being that mediator, that go between, say, for example, dad and the kids. We have a conversation about this. So feeling that added pressure to be this mediator and facilitator, but also in terms of the transition, is feeling responsible for the family and continuing to stay healthy for generations to come around that farm legacy. And now that also brings up the major stress of the young farmers, I should say, specifically that filled out the survey and participated in our focus groups and interviews. A lot of stress around transition, around, again, linked to uncertainty. So if you haven't started to have discussions about transitioning the farm, the kids are now in their 20s. In the non-ag world, you start finding yourself and finding your career path in your 20s. But if you're still in your 30s and you have no idea about the future of the farm and your role within it, it's just adding to that unpredictability and uncertainty piece. But there's also a lot of pressure, and we've heard this through our workshops and things, that the young people feel like, yes, I want to continue the family farm, but what if I'm the one that loses it? What if I'm the one that doesn't succeed? And there's huge pressure, the weight of the world really on their shoulders for the family farm to succeed. And that's where we get into talking about business practices, because we talk to the current owners and the parents and say, don't you want to leave this farm in the absolute best condition for the next generation? And doesn't it make sense to start building them into this plan, building them into how you're trying to shape the future? Because if you've got to hand this over to them one day, then we want to make sure that they know what they're getting and that they can handle it. And they've been given all the tools and the skills and all the knowledge to have the best chance for success.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @TrilliumMutual. We've talked several times on the podcast here with various people regarding farm planning and farm transitioning. And we talked recently with Elaine Fraze about how you get the conversation started. But some of what you're talking about here is you need to be doing some planning here. Well, you can't just wake up one day and say, okay, here's the farm. That takes a tremendous amount of planning. That involves a business plan. And without a business plan, you're not going to be successful in transitioning that farm. And we've seen this too many times where kids have woken up and all of a sudden they realize they're sneaking up on 45 or 50 and they still don't have an equity stake in the farm. And that's not a successful transition. At that point, you've almost reached the point where it's too late to get that from one generation to another. So when we start, does that idea of discussing that farm transition, does that lead into better business practices naturally? Or is it the better business practices that lead into the transition planning?
It's a great question. And my humble opinion, and I've said this before, is I have found that transition planning seems to be the gateway to other business practices. It seems like farmers feel like, I don't need a business plan. I'm succeeding without it. But when it comes to transition planning, nobody lives forever. So you know that eventually, whether you like it or not, you can't run your farm anymore. We only live so long. So it feels like that inevitability about one day this won't be mine seems to be a bit of a catalyst for starting conversations around all right, how are we going to pass this to the next generation, or what happens to the farm when I'm no longer capable? So we kind of see that as a bit of a gateway, which I suppose is a very good thing. And then from the transition conversation, we can talk about, okay, business continuity in general and leaving the farm in the best condition possible for the next generation, and then kind of work our way backwards and say, okay, so we need great financial records, we need budgets and financial plans, we need investment plans, and of course, strategic plans, business plans, and the ability to get folks on the same page and pulling in the same direction for the best chance for success. But it's interesting because you talked about, and we worked with Elaine quite a bit, and I absolutely love her to death. She's so knowledgeable on all of this.
She's great to talk to, and she has such a wealth of information and knowledge.
Yeah, and so many stories and experiences. But you hit on, I think, a very important point, which was you can have the best business plan in place, but if you don't have the other side of managing the business, which is the leadership side, if you don't have, good communications, good interpersonal relationships, clarity and trust, then the plan can quickly go south or not be used at all. So it's really important to kind of come at both angles. I mean, you can have the best communications in the world and best interpersonal relations, but if you don't have a mechanism to put a plan in place and follow that plan, then you're stuck as well. So it really takes dovetailing, having a process for planning and having a mechanism to review and monitor your progress, along with how are we working on how we're communicating, how we're building trust, how we're building the relationships that will carry this plan forward. That's a really important point. And that's where recently we've kind of started to venture into the world of leadership development and leadership effectiveness, realizing we can get all these folks pumped up about business planning or transition planning, but then they go back to the farm and they kind of hit that brick wall, whether the brick wall is their spouse or their parents or their kids or other members of the farm team. We really need to start working on that other side of the coin, which is being able to showing up as your best self and empowering others to do the same by really understanding how is it I communicate, like to communicate, make decisions, and understanding that we're all different in that capacity and appreciating that as we move forward with some of these business processes.
It all has to work together. You have to have the business plan, but you also have to be able to implement it. You can't implement it unless you have communication. You can't plan it for the future unless you have some goals and some benchmarks as to what you're going to reach and when you're going to reach them. And I know from the mental health standpoint and the stress, there's nothing relieves stress like being able to say, there was a goal that I set 2 years ago and we finally reached it. If you don't have the goal in the first place, then you can't reach it. And you never get that stress relief. From your different studies, what sort of recommendations have you come up with for trying to help out on the family farm using business management to reduce stress?
What we concluded from the mental health study was that we've been trying to promote being proactive and planning, and have a business plan, because that is the foundational piece for any farm, to have that mechanism for evaluation and planning and then analysis and monitoring and all that wonderful stuff. It's a great process to have in place. Farmers didn't get into farming to be business managers. We know that. It's not something comfortable and it's not something natural. Well, for some.
I farmed because my father farmed and we've always done it this way. And we don't need a business plan because we've always been successful, as you said. It was difficult when I was in my 20s and 30s to get a farm transitioned from one generation to the next. A lot more dollars. It's a lot more difficult now. So you would think that a lot of people would want to do this.
Yeah, you would. But we appreciate that we didn't get into this because we want to manage people and, have an HR policy and things like that. But at the same time, of course, our research shows that that is going to help. There's so much untapped potential in terms of the opportunities there. We're all wired for kind of that immediate gratification. We want to see results right away. And especially when you come to the farmer who tends to be an entrepreneur, tends to be pretty comfortable taking risks, especially when younger, and like risk and reward, like, yeah, let's get on it. So having those predispositions towards entrepreneurship or whatever, it's like immediate gratification. So when we're saying, well, you should slow down and you should have a business plan, I don't think that's sat really right. So I think what we've been trying to do is kind of meet the farmers where they are, kind of in the here and now, versus the there and then. So rather than thinking of, I don't even know what's happening tomorrow, how can I possibly create a business plan? So of course, there's some education we have to do around that. And there's different levels of planning, from the strategic to the operational and everything in between. But we also recognize that I am farming today and my problem is this and this and this and this and this. So we're working towards and moving toward a risk assessment and risk management approach to the adoption of business practices. So if we can meet the farmers where they are and start to provide some immediate gratification pieces, like for example, maybe it's I'm struggling with relating with my father, or trying to get access to the books, or trying to have a real conversation about the future of the farm. That's where our program is stepping into that. Okay, so what are the tools? What are the practical learning opportunities we can put in place to try and make some progress there in that specific space? As you move through your farm and making decisions and coming up against challenges, the program is there to help you move through that and to say, I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to apply it to this here and now situation and actually start to see a difference, rather than saying, oh, do a business plan, you'll see great results in about 5 years. It doesn't quite work, even for me. So I think that's the biggest thing that's come out of this mental health research is the uncertainty and the unpredictability is really what's shaking a lot of farmers and causing a lot of stress. So if we can do incremental little things to alleviate some of that uncertainty, I think that'll be a very good thing. And we've seen a lot of success in we have a risk management training program that we're offering right now that kind of gives that comprehensive way to assess and prioritize and plan and mitigate risk. But I think it's also a conversation that kind of needs to go up the ladder a little bit as well. On the federal side and provincial side of things, we've been talking about the BRM, so the Business Risk Management Program. There's a huge gap in terms of government insurance and support programs and the farm business management practices that farmers can do themselves. We see the business practices as being proactive, perhaps preventing risk, but certainly dealing with mitigating the negative effects of risk, whereas insurance and government programs are more so designed to deal with the aftermath, the fallout if something happens. So, okay, you've got price insurance and you use it because the price isn't what you were hoping for, or you've got hail insurance, or you've got this, that, and the other. It seems that when we talk about farm business management and risk management, risk seems to be isolated to this insurance side of things. But really, I would say a business plan is a risk management tool, financial records is a risk management tool, HR policy is a risk management tool. All these things are helping combat risk. And it's really about the farmer sitting back and saying, what are the things that are outside of my control, inside of my control, and what measures am I putting in place to mitigate the negative impacts on either side, and also be in a situation where I can seize opportunity? Because of course, risk is necessary for business. You have to take risks, especially as we've seen it with COVID. You've got to jump on opportunities. But if you're not sure where you stand and what your capacity is to kind of seize that opportunity, then that can be an issue too, and really stifling to your farm. We don't want to say get rid of any possibility of risk, because of course that'll never happen. But if there's risks that you can avoid or manage better within your own capacity and decrease some of that unpredictability that's causing so much stress, then surely that's a good thing.
It's interesting because you talk about the business risk management programs. I worked administering those for quite a few years, so I'm very familiar with what those are. That's a very good tool to mitigate income loss for whatever reason. And when my income drops, therefore, there's something there that's a safety net. But business risk management should be so much more. Like, what can you do to make sure that you never get to that point where you have that kind of loss? And we don't think of it that way, but something like multiple enterprises. You have a dairy farm, but you also have a chicken barn, and you also have a cash crop. And all of those things work to mitigate that risk too, of not having all your eggs in one basket. And yet too often we just think about it, well, I need a safety net if everything goes bad. There's lots of other stuff that you can do in the meantime too.
Exactly. The programs are there to catch us when we fall, when it's unexpected, but to look at those programs as being dependent on them is a little bit counterintuitive. Your goal shouldn't be to trigger government safety programs. Your goal should be to put measures in place so you don't even need them. They're there if you need them, but you're not working towards getting a payment. It's more they're there if you need them, but you're focusing on what's over here. And that's the opportunity and the potential, and kind of looking ahead, not backwards in a way.
I think the significant stress of that, and believe me, I've heard that. I didn't trigger a payout. People realize that they have suffered a significant financial loss and there isn't going to be help. And they thought that that program would give them that help there. But you're right. I work in insurance now. The best thing that can happen to you is that you don't have to use your insurance. Insurance is there if you need it. But things go much better if you don't have a loss in the first place. That's where that proactive business risk management comes in.
I guess I would say and encourage opening your mind to think about what are the risks you're facing and what possible things can you do to mitigate that risk. So obviously we can't control the weather, but we can control our response to the weather. We can put in drainage tile, or we can put in wind buffers or erosion buffers or natural filtration systems and things like that. You think about all the things that seem out of your control. What are the things that you could do to start gaining some control, even if it's just a little bit? We can control our response to that, as well as what we do going forward should that happen again. The goal of the government and industry in 1992, when we were set up, was we want to put this organization in place so that all farmers across Canada have awesome best management practices in place for running the farm like a business, and so that this never happens again. And that if it does happen again in terms of interest rates and commodity prices, we'll be better positioned to remain resilient, to move through it, and even be brighter on the other side for it. Is COVID maybe a new opportunity to say, holy smokes, things can change pretty fast. And how did we fare? Were we in a position to pivot the business to seize opportunity or to mitigate the additional risks? And what can we do to better prepare ourselves going forward, not knowing what the future holds?
Having lived through those high interest rates, I can vouch for the fact that we don't want to see that come back again. Do you think we've been successful at implementing in the years since 92? Have we been successful in improving business practices in the industry?
I wish that I was a little bit more, I guess, longer in the tooth to, remember
it's
those
overrated.
days and
It's
what it meant
overrated.
for.
Don't worry about that.
Honestly, the fact that we did our study looking at the adoption of practices over the last 5 years, and they all went down significantly, especially those practices that were proven to have a link to higher profitability. I think the past has been in the past. And of course, as generations change over and, you don't see what could happen and business has been relatively good, we've kind of lost that connection in a lot of ways. And it's interesting because I remember a couple of years ago, we were sitting around and saying people would pay a lot more attention to this stuff if we had a crisis. Not that you're wishing a crisis on agriculture at all. I mean, we see our fair share of risks and challenges and whatnot, but it's just, what is it going to take to get the industry to sit up and say, we need to take this serious? We're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into research into crop varieties or genetics, which is wonderful. And we need to stay on the leading edge, but kind of see business management kind of whimpering along in the background and saying, but you need to build capacity. And why are we doing all this? What's the main goal? And how are we going to stay safe and healthy mentally and physically as we embark on all these opportunities? I would definitely like to see a pretty significant shift. I know the minister is hosting some roundtable discussions on the next policy framework here in the next 2 weeks. And I'm really hoping that we can get a little bit more headway and a little bit more help from industry, waving the banner that says, please continue investment in business skills development and research around that too, so that we can make the same type of headway we're making on the production side. That would be kind of our recipe for success, saying our management rocks, our production rocks, let's go.
It's interesting from a perspective here, when we talk about being proactive, your business practices improvement really is a proactive approach to mental health. We're starting to see many situations here where people are talking about coping with high stress levels. And this is a method to reduce high stress levels, remove the risk, if you like, or remove the stressors there, because you do have that certainty. I guess it shouldn't be surprising, but it is a little surprising that there isn't more of an uptake on that. If people want to find out more about Farm Management Canada, where can they get that information?
The easiest place to go is either social media or our website. So our website is www.fmc-gac.com. And then our social media is pretty much just the same. It's at fmc.gac on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and all those wonderful tools, YouTube as well. So, yeah, lots of great content. We're spinning out new content every day. We're always sharing tips and tricks and inspiring articles and inspiring people. If there's ever anything anyone wants to know about anything in particular, what resources are available, what programs are available, what learning opportunities, or even just the state of what's going on transition planning or whatnot, they can always reach out to me or any member of the team, and we'd be happy to find the way for them to the answers that they need. And I guess I would just, if I can, make a bit of a plug for, we have two cool learning opportunities coming up. So one is we're partnering with MNP to offer a farm financial fluency training program. So it's basically 3 2-hour sessions, virtually, of course. And we're looking for hosts who want to kind of host that for their commodity groups or for their federations or whatnot. And then the other one is our big event of the year. The Agricultural Excellence Conference is taking place November 24th to 26th. It'll be online and it's free for anyone to attend. And basically it's 3 days of talking all farm business management all the time. So talking about financial management best practices, transition, HR, the economic and market outlooks and what that means on a practical level, as well as a mix between advisors and government and industry experts, including farmers themselves, knowing that farmers like to listen to other farmers and they're inspired by each other.
It all works together when you start about planning. It's a good opportunity to start planning for what you're going to do in the future of 2021.
It's a good time of year as well. Coming to a conference in November, you can kind of mull things over, try a few things out over the Christmas break, and then come January, you're ready to put your plan together and put the key in the ignition come planting season. So
thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today. We've been speaking with Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada about the link between business management practices and mental health on the farm. Join us next time when our guest will be Denise Philippe, and we'll be talking about food wastage in Canada and the world.
So much, Mike. The pleasure's all mine, and we love to talk about farm business management all the time. So any chance we can have to talk about this stuff, we'll take it. So thank you again so much.
You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.